The story we're diving into today is, well, it's as heartbreaking as it is horrifying. It's the story of Ivy Wangechi, a brilliant medical student with her whole life ahead of her, and Naftali Kinuthia, the childhood friend whose obsession would cut that future tragically short.
It's really a tale of two people. On one side, you have Ivy Wangechi, an aspiring doctor, a beloved daughter, a friend, and on the other, Naftali Kinuthia, who went from being a childhood friend to an obsessed suitor and ultimately her murderer. So how does that happen? How does a relationship with such innocent beginnings end so violently?
To really understand how this story ends, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a shared past that gave absolutely no hint of the violence that was to come.
You know, they grew up as neighbors in Thika. They even went to the same primary school, where Naftali, being older, kind of looked out for Ivy like a big brother. Both of them were really smart. Ivy went on to one of Kenya's best high schools and then straight into medical school. Meanwhile, Naftali studied computer tech and even started his own business. They were on these parallel paths to success, with a friendship that had literally lasted for years.
But then, around 2017, the whole dynamic between them started to shift. Naftali's feelings for Ivy grew into something more, but she didn't feel the same way. And that friendly affection he once had just curdled into a really dangerous fixation.
In this quote right here from one of Ivy's friends, it gets right to the heart of it. This wasn't a case of a relationship that went wrong. It was a relationship that, from Ivy's side, never even started. According to her closest friends, she was always super clear about it. She saw Naftali as a friend, period. Nothing more.
And his response to her saying no? I mean, it's just a textbook pattern of control. He insulted her, made up these fake legal threats just to manipulate her into talking to him, and he did this thing called love bombing, showering her with gifts, paying for a birthday party he wasn't even invited to, all to make her feel like she owed him something.
The warning signs were all there, and they were getting worse. This message he sent to one of Ivy's friends is just, it's chilling to read now. This isn't the language of heartbreak, you know? It's the language of possession.
And get this, 200,000 Kenyan shillings. That's how much money Naftali calculated that Ivy owed him for all the gifts and things he'd spent on her. This was never about generosity. It was a transaction. In his mind, she was in his debt, and he was keeping a very detailed list.
Okay, so let's move to the week of her death and see how this all comes to a head. His obsession wasn't just in messages and phone calls anymore, it had turned into physical stalking.
The timeline of this final week is absolutely terrifying. Just days before her 25th birthday, he drives over 300 kilometers to just show up at her hostel, completely unannounced. She avoids him. He actually stays in town overnight, begging to see her, and she keeps saying no. 5 days later, he drives all the way there again. This wasn't random. It was relentless.
Her friends saw the danger. They were telling her, look, this is getting out of hand. You need to tell your family, maybe even call the police. But Ivy, like so many people in this situation, she just couldn't believe that the boy she grew up with, her childhood friend, was capable of real violence. It was a tragic, tragic miscalculation.
So next, let's look at how the evidence just completely dismantles Naftali's whole story about this being some crime of passion. The prosecution methodically exposed his claims, revealing a cold, pre-planned execution. The attack itself was so swift and brutal. An eyewitness, Ivy's friend who was walking right beside her, described how Naftali ambushed them from behind. There was no argument, no confrontation, just a sudden, violent assault with an axe. He struck her on the head and then struck her again after she had fallen.
The prosecution just systematically took his defense apart. Naftali claimed the axe was in his car for security. The evidence showed it was new and had been freshly sharpened. He claimed it was a sudden fit of rage. The evidence showed a long, documented history of threats and stalking. He claimed he just ran into her by chance. The eyewitness proved he ambushed her from behind. His whole story just crumbled.
So how did the justice system see through all these lies to deliver a final verdict?
It all came down to this one key legal concept: premeditation. It's the difference between acting on a sudden impulse and actually carrying out a calculated plan. It's what separates manslaughter from murder.
And that's exactly what the prosecution did. They showed that driving hundreds of kilometers with a newly sharpened axe, stalking your victim, and then attacking her from behind, that's not an impulse, that is a plan.
On December 14, 2023, after a trial that took nearly 5 years, Naftali Kinuthia was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison.
But a verdict doesn't bring Ivy back. So let's zoom out and ask, what can this devastating case teach us? How can we recognize these danger signs before it's too late?
Because Ivy's murder isn't just one isolated incident. It's a really stark example of these much bigger issues of femicide, the killing of women because they're women, and the toxic victim blaming that so often follows. It forces all of us to confront how we talk about rejection, entitlement, and violence. These are the warning signs, and Naftali exhibited every single one. Love bombing to create a sense of debt, controlling behavior when he didn't get his way, an obsession that just could not handle the word no, stalking her online and in person, and finally, making threats. These are not signs of love, they are signs of danger.
And all of this leaves us with this final, critical question. Ivy's story is a tragic reminder that we have to learn to see the difference between genuine affection and a possessiveness that believes it has the right to own and, ultimately, to destroy.